Hello everyone, I'm Flik. You probably don't know me, but that isn't important right now. In a bit of a smaller video today, I want to talk about the moment I gave up on playing God of War Ragnarok. A game I was really enjoying up until the point I put down the controller, shut off the PS5, and to date have never gone back. This is something I both regret and lament. It's something that is both my fault and the developer's fault, even though with context is justifiable. It creates this interesting topic and potential debate over playability versus immersion, and I think it might be fun to delve into that topic here a little bit today, even if there's no definitive conclusion. As a general spoiler warning, some of the story of Ragnarok will be mentioned, talked about and so on, but there will not be full story spoilers, and I won't be talking specifics about the ending or anything beyond Jotunheim. Right, with that said, let's start with some context. I loved the 2018 God of War, and that was despite not having much exposure to Kratos or the previous games in general. I think I played a demo of the PSP God of War spin-off game back in the day, and that's literally it. But just from being into gaming in general and being close to the space for so long, I know the original games lifted most of its lore and characters from Greek mythology. I knew that Kratos was a Spartan, Zeus was his father, and because Zeus and the other gods all turned out to be rotten, he murdered them all but ultimately damned his homeland. Just that vague knowledge was still enough for me to go into the 2018 God of War and pick up pretty quickly what's been going on since then. It's easy to see that Kratos is an older, damaged individual that clearly struggles to be a father for his young son. Having not played the previous God of War titles, it was a genuine surprise when the 2018 game suddenly went full anime punch through building power level mode when Baldur visits and then fights with Kratos near the start of the game. It was great, and sets the mood for the rest of the game that follows after it. This is what happens when two gods fight, and it's why Kratos wants to protect his son Atreus from learning anything about it. The journey they go through is incredibly memorable, and just an overall excellent game. Loved it. Now is probably the time though that I should point out that in general, outside of the spectacle boss fights, I don't like the combat of God of War 2018 that much. For these types of games I prefer more agile, frenetic, Devil May Cry style, but I'm fully admitting that this is entirely a personal preference thing. It's not a critique per se. And I still played the whole game through despite feeling that way. The game kept me hooked because I was enjoying the story, characters and the boss fights so much that it didn't matter that the gameplay was, to me, just kinda average. I really want to make that clear though. I'm saying that I found it kind of average and not for me, not that there's anything fundamentally wrong with how the game played. So along comes God of War Ragnarok, the sequel to the 2018 game, and I instantly knew I was going to play it despite the core gameplay being largely the same. Why was it still worth buying to me? Because I was that interested in seeing the story. The world, characters and depth that the 2018 game had created drew me in so much that I wanted to go through another journey with the characters, despite the gameplay not entirely being my thing. It's a game where the movie-like qualities are entirely to its favour from my perspective, well, at least most of the time. That brings us to the point, I suppose. What was the moment I gave up on Ragnarok and as of yet have never gone back? Well, if you watch my playthrough, such as it is, on stream or the VODs here on YouTube, you already know. It was when Atreus dreams himself into Jotunheim and you go through a very drawn out sequence of meeting Angrboda, I think that's how it's pronounced, apologies if it isn't, and helping her with her chores. Along with feeding her animal and collecting fruits, you do a lot of slow walking where it's clear that Angrboda has information for Atreus, she says as much plenty of times, but is putting off telling him for reasons at that point unknown. It really drags on quite a bit, especially compared to the story beats just before it, with the revelation of finding Groa's true hidden message in Alfheim. It should also be stated there are moments of combat to break up the sections of them walking, talking or riding together, and she does teach Atreus to master his shape-shifting mode, which is like his version of Kratos' rage mode. And while I do appreciate that the developers tried to make Atreus fun to play as, his sections didn't do anything for me gameplay-wise either. There is more to the section than I saw at the time, but after what felt like 2 hours of walking and talking, I gave up. Just as the two were about to head to Angrboda's grandmother's house, aka, for those who know, the bit where things really start to pick up again. Yep, it was poor timing, but I can't pretend I wasn't bored or uninterested by the gameplay I'd been subjected to for the hours before that. What makes this especially interesting is that the pacing of this whole section is completely justified after the fact. It makes perfect sense, it's logical, it's in character, it absolutely fits and gives great context if you look back. But that's where the interesting problem arises, and we'll need to go into spoilers about this section here to talk about it. Despite giving up on the playthrough of the game I was doing, a short time later I went and found a full playthrough without commentary, one single video on YouTube to watch, since I was invested in where the story was going. I skipped the start of the Angrboda section to the point I stopped playing, and watched, and listened, and understood why it had been like that, at least in concept. I don't know if I would go so far as to say it was a necessary evil to do it the way they did, since it feels so self-indulgent, but it did serve a purpose. Angrboda believes that her life has no meaning after completing the last thing fate had ordained her to do, which was to give Atreus the spirit stones containing the souls of the Jotunheim giants. Her future was not painted beyond that point, so she believes her life has literally no purpose after the moment is over. So, she drags it out. She drags it and drags it out. She wants it to last forever, that's the point. She tries to live an hour for every minute, I guess you could say, because no one wants their life to be meaningless or devoid of purpose, especially at such a relatively young age. This realisation recontextualised the previous slow section in a way that made me appreciate it a bit more, but this is only with knowledge I would have gained had I pushed on through it. I'm sure I'm not the only one that found this section boring or that perhaps gave up at this point. So I come back to my original point of this video, playability over immersion. There are other, less indulgent ways this point could have been put across. A quick Google search and a look around Reddit does show that other people felt this section of the game is probably the weakest part. Although I found a Screen Rant article from January 2023 listing the 10 valid criticisms of God of War Ragnarok, and this section where you meet Angrboda wasn't listed, so oh well, guess I'm wrong. By the way, I'm not linking to that article. I took a look through it and it's not good. If you think my points are bad, wait until you hear not enough gods or too much story. God, I hope that article was satire. The story of God of War Ragnarok is well thought out and incredibly detailed with multiple layers of lore to go through should you wish it. There is depth to almost every character too. It adds to Angrboda's character in a meaningful way and subtly tells us about her opinion on destiny, fate, whatever you want to call it, but this comes at the cost of gameplay. Why not have a time-lapse of Atreus helping her around the farm for the day to imply that they spent at least a few hours together, maybe longer? Why not speed up the rate at which her goat thing travels through the surrounding waters at while they collect fruit? Or cut out the number of times you have to stop along the way? I know this is somewhat ironic me saying this, but why not use less words to convey the same message? It would have improved the pace but kept the meaning. Balancing gameplay with story is tricky, and in general I think the newer God of War games are actually pretty amazing at doing it so well. This one section just didn't work for me, and for other people either, it seems. While I'm writing this, I'm working on a rather large dissection video of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and in that game it forces side activities upon you that are just endlessly dull and an utter chore to do. From what I played of Ragnarok, every time a side quest popped up I was excited for the extra depth these stories would provide for the game's world. They were genuinely interesting. It's rare for a game to be that compelling when it comes to side story content. With the benefit of hindsight, I would have told my previous self to push on through meeting Angrboda and enjoy the rest of the game, old chap. It flows much better after you get to her grandmother's house and then leave Jotunheim, I promise. It also does set up a nice enough character arc for Angrboda and lets Atreus learn more about fate, or specifically defying fate, which is one of the game's core themes. Like, none of these things are pointless at all. They do all forward the plot and characters in meaningful ways. It's just, couldn't it have been handled a little better to service the gameplay too? I don't know what the right answer is here, or if there even is a right answer. It is obviously somewhat subjective. What do you think? This section killed my particular motivation to continue playing the game, but I did go on to enjoy watching the rest of the game play out in a YouTube video, and it isn't like the gameplay was precisely to my taste in the first place, but it does mean I didn't quite get the same experience I would have had I been playing it through myself all the way to the end. Sometimes a game can put story over gameplay, and it's more common with games that try to have a cinematic, movie-esque feel. For the most part, the God of War games do a good job balancing this, but the lapse in judgment here kinda costs them. There are other ways they could have handled Atreus meeting Angrboda and the various plot points they need to go through, as I mentioned previously. I'm surprised no one felt the utter slowdown to a snail's pace these scenes cause were out of place or at odds with the stakes being raised from the revelations discovered in Alfheim. Sometimes gameplay matters more, even if it's to get you from one important story beat to the next. You have to keep the player engaged, and in this instance, they didn't. I do still recommend the game and would encourage you to use what I've learned in hindsight to your advantage. Push through Jotunheim. It is worth it. The game is really good and apparently got some decent post-launch free DLC that also caps off the story in a satisfying way. I heard that from my Discord, can't speak from direct experience. What do you think on the subject though? What mattered more here? Was the developers taking their time to illustrate Angrboda wanting the moments to last forever at the cost of gameplay acceptable? Or should they have condensed it for the benefit of the greater narrative and overall gameplay experience? I don't think there's a definitive right answer, as I said before, but I am still curious where people's opinions on this falls. Thanks for giving this a listen though. Let me know if, along with my video essays dissecting video game stories, you'd like more of these smaller little takes on aspects of video games new and old, because I am interested in doing more of them. Either way though, enjoy the rest of your day, and ta-ta for now.